Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for today's show. You know, a few weeks ago I did an episode on basic rules of fishing. I gave 5 basic rules of fishing that talked about things like current and colors and bait size, basic things that can be applied to multiple different species, not just bass, but all species out there. If you go back and watch that video, and I'll put the link at the end of this video to it, if you watch that video, you'll see that those are things that can be applied to pretty much all species. Saltwater, even, freshwater, it doesn't really matter. It's just general information. And I said in that one that if I got a bunch of likes on it and that you guys expressed to me that you really enjoyed the video, I could do a lot more of those videos. And you guys really had a very overwhelming reply to it that you loved the information. You thought it was all really valuable because they're quick, short tips that, I could probably make videos on every one of them about, but I just figured it would be easier just to spew information. I had a lot of things going through my head, and it's easy for me to sit down and come up with a bunch of these things that I think will really help all of the viewers out there learn a thing or two, or at least remind you about some things, or allow you to put together an experience you had with one of the rules and be like, that's why that happened. That's something I need to continue to look for and repeat it, because these are things that hold true pretty much year round anywhere you're at in the country. And like I said, it doesn't really matter what type of fish you're after. You can apply these to pretty much all the different species. So because of you guys out there wanting more of these, I'm going to keep doing this. So this is the second one. So these will be another 5 basic rules of fishing. So 6 through 10, we'll call this one. And before I get into it, I just want to remind you guys that if you want to support the channel, you can do that in several ways. You can go into my description, click the link to thereelshot.com, and you can save 10% off your purchases there if you use the discount code Stefan10. You guys get a little better deal on it. It helps the channel out a little bit. You can go to my store, purchase some of my shirts that I've come up with. The link is right in my description as well. And lastly, if you want a lake breakdown, I've been doing a bunch of lake breakdowns. Head over to fishthemoment.com and you can click on some of the lake breakdowns I've done for northern bodies of water, largemouth and smallmouth, as well as southern smallmouth, just specific lake breakdowns to smallmouth in southern reservoirs. So guys, head over there. It's all the information's in my description, and we'll get into this. So the first thing that I want to talk about today has to do with bait choice. And it is so important for you guys to stick with the baits that you have the confidence in, not baits that other people are telling you to use. This, I tell you, I have bought a ton of baits that I never end up using. And B, I have gotten to lakes where I was told to use certain baits and I end up reverting back to the baits that I have confidence in and have the most success in them. It is not as simple as tie a bait on, go to a lake, and catch fish. I've said all along that confidence is king in the sport. 50% of being a successful fisherman is being confident in what it is that you're doing. And a lot of that comes down to your bait choice. Just because somebody else is telling you to do something else with a different bait doesn't necessarily make them right. It doesn't make them wrong. But what it means is they might catch them on one bait, you might catch them on a different bait, and you might catch them better on a bait that you have more confidence in than trying to figure out how to use a bait that someone else is telling you to do. I have found that in my years, it has saved me a lot of money when I go to these lakes. Early in my career, I used to do a ton of research on the hot baits, hot colors for every lake I went to. And I can tell you at the end of the year, I had so much tackle, it was ridiculous. A lot of this tackle, guys, is actually from that. A lot of the stuff on the wall back here is stuff that isn't going in and out of my boat every day. That stuff back there is either stuff I've bought and I don't necessarily want to get rid of, but I don't use, or it's like duplicates of stuff that I use all the time and I want to make sure I have it on hand so I don't have to put orders in or run into times when I can't get a certain bait. So I don't necessarily think it's a great thing to do all the research on these lakes and go, you know what, I need to throw this bait in this color when you've got one in roughly the same color that, you have a ton of confidence in. So confidence is king, guys. Don't have to have every other bait on the market just because somebody else is telling you it's better. Very rarely do I feel like that one specific bait is the reason why someone is being successful. So that's a rule. Another rule, guys, if you're a shallow water fisherman and you like fishing around the bank, a really easy way to break down an area that has more life in it, and if it has more life in it, I'm talking, it could be crayfish, it could be panfish, it could be minnows, it could be shad, it could be bass, whatever it is. An easy way to do that is if you see active birds as you're going down the shoreline and you see a bunch of herons or cranes or egrets, whatever the birds are in your area that are minnow feeders or snail, they eat snails or crustaceans or bait fish, whatever they are. If you know that they are feeding on that type of thing and you see a stretch of bank that has a bunch of the birds lined up in it, they may not be actively feeding, like you may not see them actually trying to get a minnow, but those birds are standing in the water. They're there for a reason. And generally, if those birds are there because there's bait there, then you start the whole food cycle, right? So if there's crustaceans or clams or snails or insects, you got minnows, and then you got bluegill, and then you got shad, and then you got bass, right? So, and again, it's not just bass, that works for everything. If you have life, chances are good that you'll have all of the species in the area. And a really easy way to do that is simply looking for birds on the bank. The same thing can be said for offshore. If you see feeding birds, seagulls or loons, they're feeding on bait, and chances are there's bigger fish feeding on that bait as well. So birds can be a very, very easy indicator to an area that could be very successful for you. So pay attention to that when you're running down the lake. The next thing has to do with shade lines. So this is the third one for today. You'll often hear people talk about fishing the shady bank. As much as I agree with that, I also completely disagree with that. If you have sunny conditions, it is almost always better to fish the sunny bank because then you have specific shade pockets that are being created by anything that's on that bank. A laydown tree, a group of lily pads, a dock, an overhanging bush, whatever it is, you have a confined piece of shade on that bank. What that does is if there are fish on that bank, they will gravitate to those small shade areas, which give you guys an isolated place to fish. It condenses the fish. It makes you much more efficient and productive because you know where to cast based on that shade line. If you go and fish the shaded bank, those fish don't have to be grouped up next to the dock or next to a log or a group of pads. They're spread out, moving up and down that bank. It makes it harder for you guys and myself to identify and to catch where those fish are on a bank that they're roaming versus the sunny bank where they are going to be living in those little shade pockets. It is so much more efficient. This is something that the great Andy Morgan told me like my first year on tour. And it is something that is like, at that point I knew that, but I didn't know it, if that makes sense. And now it's like the most obvious thing in the world to me. And that's why I'm relaying it to you guys, because I think a lot of people just assume to fish the shaded bank. It's better to go stand in the sun and put your bait in that little shade pocket, which is where the fish is going to be. The next rule has to do with traffic on the water. Don't let boat traffic or people traffic move you away from where the fish are at. In fact, a lot of times you can utilize that boat traffic or people traffic. And what I mean by people traffic is swimmers, kayakers, people on paddle boards, that type of thing. Just people moving around. That's not a bad thing because most of the time on those bodies of water, those fish are very, very accustomed to hearing lots of motors, to hearing lots of people, to hearing those noises, to the point where they will utilize it to their advantage. And what I mean by that is if you've got a beach with 20 kids playing, shuffling in the sand, stirring stuff up, Well, if you've ever been at a beach, what do you see happen? Minnows come in, they start feeding on everything that's been stirred up, and there are always bass hanging around as well. So when they start getting that motion, it almost draws them in like a dinner bell. The same thing can be said for heavy boat traffic areas. If you have channels where there's boating lanes and all the boats are going through a certain area, every time that boat goes through, that prop wash will stir stuff up and you can get active fish. I've had several times in my career where the only time I could get bit was when I threw into the prop wash of a boat as I waited there for the boats to actually come by me, because that got the fish active. It's amazing to me how often people move away from the activity because they think it's scaring the fish. It is not scaring the fish. I can assure you of that. The last thing has to do with fishing in cold water months like we're in right now. So this is the 5th rule for today. Anytime you're dealing with colder periods of the year, so I'm going to say depending where you're at, so the cooler periods, the winter, spring months, you're almost always better trying to find warmer water. And the reason for that isn't necessarily that the fish will always gravitate to it. A lot of fish will, but not all fish will move from their home to a little bit warmer water. The key here is that little bit warmer water is going to have more active fish in it. So you may have an area that's only got 10 fish in it versus a wintering area or someplace where they're deeper, but they're in a more lethargic mood, and there may be 100 fish there. Well, to be able to get those 100 fish to bite is going to be harder than getting a handful of those 10 fish that are up in the warmer water, wherever that may be. And the reason for that is they're up there probably feeding. That warmer water has got them in a more active mood, because as a cold-blooded creature, they do have to feed more as water temperature rises. So, this time of year in the winter months, it's always better, in my opinion, to look for areas you've got warmer water coming in. That could be a creek that's just got more runoff, so that water's warmer than the main lake you're fishing. It could be a hot water discharge. It could be shallow bays, mud bottom bays. It varies based on lake, but it is something that you want to be aware of in the colder water periods, because those will generally be areas that have more active fish. It may not have more fish, but the fish are more easily caught in those areas. So guys, that was 5 more basic rules of fishing. I hope this was helpful for you guys. If it was, hit that like button. That's how I know if you guys like it. Leave me a comment saying that you enjoyed it and you want more of these videos. And stay tuned. We got a new video coming out tomorrow. Thanks for watching.